years ago, an editor assigned me to cover the Free State Project. A local contact steered me to a young man who was then a Yale graduate student, Jason Sorens. Jason Sorens had come up with the idea of the Free State Project, which was the idea that if 20,000 libertarians came to one state, which they would choose, in this case they chose New Hampshire, that they could achieve the critical mass that they needed to effect real political change. Today, having earned his PhD in political science at Yale, Jason is now a lecturer in the Department of Government at Dartmouth College, and he's also the president of an educational nonprofit that works with high school students to teach and state-level policymakers to teach them ethics and economics. It's called the Ethics and Economics Education of New England. Now the Free State Project is more than 80% towards its goal of getting the 20,000 people. And we are very happy in the Liberty Movement to have the Free Staters here. They come out on their lunchtime to help us with various demonstrations. They're involved in a lot of local races. They're just first-rate patriots. And I'd like you to meet the founder of the Free State Project, Jason Sorens.
Thank you very much, Sylvia, and everyone else involved in this. It's great to be invited to speak. And Sylvia wanted me to remind everyone that today's event is about selecting a single presidential candidate for advocates of economic freedom here in New Hampshire. As one of those advocates and as a Republican, I endorse that very much. But today my talk is about reaching young people for liberty. So I'm going to start by giving you a little bit of what political science says about young voters today. And then I'm going to talk very briefly about my own work with Ethics and Economics Education of New England, or E3NE for short. And I should note that I don't speak for E3NE. E3NE is a nonprofit educational charity, so my opinions here do not necessarily reflect those of E3NE. Very well. Young voters today. So when we look at how age affects political opinions, there's a distinction we need to make between two types of effects. One is a life cycle effect in which voters change their minds as they get older, right? And then the other is a birth cohort effect in which voters who come of age at a particular time period tend to have particular views. So cohort effects in politics are strong. Voters of my age remember the Reagan years and the fall of communism. We still lean Republican because we still think of Republicans as stronger on the economy and of socialism as a massive failure. Millennials are much more democratic than the electorate as a whole and are likely to stay that way. According to the Harvard Institute of Politics, in spring 2014, Democrats had a 39 to 24% partisan identification advantage over Republicans among voters aged 15 to 29. That's a 15 percentage point divide, and that has remained stable over the last 5 years. Democrats have only a 10 percentage point advantage among younger millennials, age 18 to 24. And only a 3-point advantage among voters age 18 to 20. Again, it's a cohort effect. These are voters who have come of age during 7 years of economic stagnation under Obama, and they're starting to switch back to the Republicans. Now, a life cycle effect, an example of that would be that younger voters have always been more trusting of government. In fact, younger voters are more trusting of everybody, it turns out. And as they age, they become less trustful of government. Maybe experience teaches them something there. The Harvard survey I mentioned also finds that voters aged 18 to 29 are far less trustful of government now than they were a few years ago. Only 20% trust the federal government to do the right thing all or most of the time, compared to 29% in early 2010. By the way, 28% trust state government and 33% trust local government. So the more local, the more trust. Today, most young voters still associate Republicans and conservatism with the Bush administration. When they think of conservatism, believe it or not, they think of the catastrophic Iraq War, the onset of the Great Recession, bailouts to big banks and auto companies, huge increases in federal deficits, incompetence and cronyism, as revealed in the Katrina response and the Harriet Miers Supreme Court nomination, close ties to the oil industry, the Patriot Act and mass surveillance, torture, accusing your political adversaries of insufficient patriotism, and so on and so forth. The Bush administration was a disaster for this country, yes, but it's also a millstone around the neck of the Republican Party for decades to come. Surprisingly, then, the millennial generation actually remains up for grabs politically. Democrats haven't exactly won their undying allegiance by forcing them to buy expensive insurance and to subsidize older, sicker people, and by doing nothing to rein in the Social Security and Medicare programs that will give them poor returns over their lifetimes. A recent survey from Reason Roop shows that millennials are far more likely to describe themselves as independents than other parts of the electorate. While socially progressive on most social issues, not abortion, interestingly, on abortion, young voters have more or less the same views as older voters, but while generally socially progressive, young voters are not economically progressive. They are far more likely than other age groups to support legalizing marijuana and same-sex marriage, though, of course, those are now also majority positions among Americans as a whole. Now, bear in mind, voters do not become more conservative as they age. That is a myth. You largely stick with the ideology you develop between age 15 and age 25. Pew Research finds two ideological groups overrepresented among young voters. They call them young outsiders and next generation left. Young outsiders, quote, lean Republican but do not have a strong allegiance to the Republican Party. In fact, they tend to dislike both political parties. On many issues, from their support for environmental regulation to their liberal views on social issues, they diverge from traditional GOP orthodoxy. Yet in their support for limited government, young outsiders are firmly in the Republicans' camp. So we can show young voters the way forward on some issues, especially relating to the role of government in the economy. Everyone wants a productive economy. Everyone wants prosperity. And the evidence in favor of free market economics in that regard is very strong. Young voters are open to that. On values issues, we need to pitch our policies as promoting young voters' values. That means greater respect for the environment and for personal freedom and expression, values that sociologists call post-materialist values. That's what matters to young voters today. And that's what's going to matter to tomorrow's core of the electorate. Politicians who fail to adapt will die off. I have a lot of experience working with young people as a college professor and as founder of E3NE. E3NE is not an ideological organization. We have tax-exempt 501c3 status from the IRS. We teach moral philosophy and economic theory. We introduce students to free market ideas through books like Milton and Rose Friedman's Free to Choose, John Locke's Second Treatise of Government, and so on. But more importantly, these students are introduced to critical thinking about moral and economic issues in our weekly discussions. They learn how to avoid economic fallacies and clarify their moral concepts. Just for instance, my students learn that it's possible to advocate someone's having a right to do something without necessarily endorsing what that person does. We should respect your freedom of speech, even if you use that freedom badly. And we can criticize what you say without infringing on your freedom of speech. We at E3NE believe that clear thinking about moral and economic theory will lead to better thinking about public policy and politics. For the future of our state, we believe strongly in teaching the next generation how to think for themselves. So we do have a table here outside. Please stop by and sign up for our monthly email list. and visit us online at e3ne.org. I would greatly appreciate your support. Thank you.
Croc TV.